Still think you're going to need to do a strike through interlock.
You ready? Jan, you ready? Hey everybody, thanks for coming to the workshop this afternoon. I want to make a couple of quick announcements before we get started. The first one is we'll be having a second workshop on October the 2nd at 1 p.m. in this very same facility, so just keep that in mind. And we'll, again, be discussing the topics and some of the discussions we've had today. We'll carry those over until to the second workshop. Also, before you speak, it's very important we have your name, so please give your name before you speak. Also, I just want to remind everyone, this is a workshop. We're here to discuss solutions to some issues we have, any ideas, suggestions, comments. We're looking for those. Not a venue to argue. We want to get solutions to some problems and get your feedback on the proposed changes we have. Again, they're proposed. There'll be other workshops, and I'm sure there'll be other changes. But again, we want to encourage everyone to give us your comments and your suggestions on these issues, and so it's very important that we get your name and your information down very clearly. We'll be recording it also on the screen, so everyone can see that, and we can make that available after the workshop, the comments that were made to us. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll start with the parking ordinance. We have two parts to this. The first part is dealing with parking for residential properties, and the second part is for commercial parking. I'll ask Tim Brown, one of our senior planners, to kind of give us a brief on the first one, which is the parking for residential structures.
Good afternoon, everyone. The issue has been we've had problems with people converting after they build their house and get their certificate of occupancy. They convert non-bedroom space into bedroom space to rent it out. So a 4-bedroom may become a 7 or 8 bedroom, and they only have parking for 4. So we're proposing using the same parking standards that are in Grayton Beach and Point Washington and do them countywide. I mean, this is exactly the language that's in the Point Washington neighborhood plan and that's in the Grayton Beach section of our land development code. So we're proposing, instead of just those two communities, to do it countywide.
And again, Tim, just you had mentioned this before, but we are following a model that was developed for Grayton Beach and also Point Washington.
Point Washington.
Okay. All right, with that, we'll kick it off. Any comments or suggestions? If everyone would just raise your hand, we'll call upon you to come up. Yes, sir.
My name's Gary Shipman. I'm with the law firm of Dunlap and Shipman in Grayton Beach. I think most of the people here are members of an organization called the Walton County Small Business Association that was formed 10 days ago, basically in reaction to this development code proposed amendment. As I understand it, you want to just talk right now about the residential, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Several of our concerns, and I just go ahead and tell you, I don't know whether to present it to you. We are going to send a copy to all county commissioners. In the last 7 days, well over 1,100 registered voters in this county have signed a petition in opposition to all of these changes. Is that something I present to you?
Yes, sir, you sure can. Thank you.
And I would point out in the last 10 days, since this organization came into being, well over 100 small businesses have joined the organization in opposition to this change. Our concern regarding the residential is as follows, and I read this as a county-wide ordinance, and as I listened, and I appreciate you explaining that apparently this has come about because there are some houses, I believe they are probably limited to South Walton County, is that correct? Have we had that problem anywhere else in the county where people convert bedrooms?
Well, the problem is two parts. One, it is a conversion to residential. Also, we have, and the last spring break, we had an issue where there were just parking problems in the Miramar Beach area as well.
Okay.
But I would say, Mr. Shipman, that you're probably correct. It is primarily, the issues are primarily in South Walton.
All right, so we're proposing an amendment to the Land Development Code concerning the entire county because of an issue that there's perceived concern about, and I don't even want to use perceived. Everybody agrees, I think, there's parking issues on 30A. I don't quite understand, and our group doesn't understand, why you would impose a parking regulation on the entire county. As I read this parking regulation, and I thought of a few examples, and I'm going to use me for an example. I own a 90-acre farm south of Defuniak. If I wanted to build a 6,000 square foot house on my 90-acre farm where I would install a driveway that was 1/3 of a mile long, under this proposed parking regulation, I would still have to build a parking lot because I'd have to have 14 parking spaces, of which 75% of it would have to be paved. You could not have tandem parking of more than 2 cars. So the only way to accomplish that would be to build a parking lot. And I couldn't come to the Planning Commission and ask for a waiver since it's on 90 acres because you want to eliminate that provision out of the planning code. That makes no sense at all. It also would significantly impact lots that are already subdivided because effectively this parking regulation would make it virtually impossible on most subdivisions in South Walton County at least to ever build a house larger than 2,000 square feet. So you significantly cut the value of those lots. I live, fortunately, in one of the neighborhoods that has larger lots in South Walton County. I live in the estuary. My lot is almost an acre. And I live in a house that heated and cooled space is probably about 3,700 square feet. Looking at this, I would have to have 7 parking spaces. Now, right now, I have 6. I live there with my wife and 3 dogs. Why would I need 7 parking spaces? What you're doing is you're saying there is a small problem 3 months a year that needs to be addressed, and there are ways to fix it, and your way of fixing it is to impose a change in the planning code, almost draconian, on the entire county, which we are opposed to. It will stifle growth in this county. It will stifle building in this county. It will discourage the construction of any house larger than 2,000 square feet. I think there are better, wiser ways of dealing with it. Now, our organization will stand up and readily admit there is a parking problem during tourist season in South Walton County, which is limited to South Walton County. I'm not aware of any problem that exists north of the bay, although maybe I don't know because I don't live up there. But that problem exists, and the parking is here today. The parking problem exists. This parking ordinance will not apply to any community that's under a DRI, which is all the large communities in South Walton County. It won't apply to Rosemary. It won't apply to Seaside. It won't apply to Alice Beach. It won't apply to Watercolor. It won't apply to Sandestin. All the problems created there, which are largely the biggest part of our property issue, this ordinance will have zero impact on. If you enact it, all the houses that have already been built will be non-compliant. Now, what does that mean? Let's talk about political realities here. If you're non-compliant and we get hit by another Hurricane Opal like we did in 1995 and all these houses get wiped out, right now, the way you have this drafted, the people couldn't rebuild their houses unless they complied with the parking requirements, which they couldn't do. Now let's be politically real about this. Do you really honestly believe that a county commission elected would come in and tell an entire segment of the county they couldn't build, and if they did, they would stay elected? This isn't the solution. We are concerned that this has come about very rapidly without a lot of input with the business community. We think the solutions to the problems that we've seen on spring break and in the middle of the summer is better served by having the county look at an overall traffic and parking plan that's not part of the development code. You need to increase public parking. You need to increase feeder roads from 98 to 30A. You need to develop public transportation on 30A, at least during tourist season. This would cause people to take the public transportation. It would cut down on the traffic problems. It would not destroy property values. It would not squash development. It would not discourage further development, which is part of the lifeblood of this county. I have other comments on the commercial portion of the amendment. As I understand, you'd like us to just limit it to residential right now.
Yes, sir. And then next we'll take up the commercial parking.
And then the last request I would have, and my organization is sending a letter today to all of the 5 county commissioners, inviting them to attend a meeting with our 100-plus business owners to discuss these problems, because we would like to work for a solution. We're not sticking our head in the sand. We just don't think the amendment to the development code is it. I read in the paper a quote from Commissioner Meadows that said that the county had hired a consultant to give an assessment of the parking needs and how to accommodate visitors and guests. I wasn't aware of that. Is that consultant a report available?
I don't believe it's finished yet, and that's been done through the Public Works Department. It's primarily looking at public properties and so forth. That is not really looking at private properties.
Okay, so there is no consultant that is involved in the amendment to the county development code?
No.
All right. And right now, as I understand it, what's driving this amendment to the development code is the concern about parking on 30A during tourist season.
Again, it's not delegated to just 30A.
Okay, including Miramar Beach.
Right.
So if we said the concern about parking on the south end of the county, south of the bay, that's what's driving this amendment to the development code.
And I think, Mr. Chairman, I think you're right. I think the majority of the issues we have been south of the bay.
Okay. And this consultant that Commissioner Meadows talked about that hasn't done a report yet has been hired through a separate division of the county to also look at parking problems south of the bay.
Again, it's my understanding that consultant is looking at the public parking issues. Public Works handle those public spaces. That's not the jurisdiction of the planning department.
Shouldn't both those things be done together if the whole idea is to try to fix the parking issues south of the bay in Walton County?
I think a majority of the issues that they're looking at are the public access parking areas. They're not going to look at all about what our standards are, it's my understanding, and what our standards are for private property.
So what you're saying is, when I read this article, and Commissioner Meadows commented that a consultant was hired to look at the proposal, that's not this proposal.
That I don't believe it is.
Okay. Thank you. Our group has also consulted with our own planner, and he has comments about the negative impacts, particularly about the amount of pavement this will require and some other matters, and I would ask that he address you next, because he will be better at addressing the technical aspects and their problems than I am. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Shipman.
Thank you, Gary. My name is Mark Schnell. I am...
Excuse me just a second, Art. If I could, just before we get any further into this, The purpose of this workshop is to help develop workable standards. It's not necessarily to vet these things that we're proposing in here. This is to get everybody to attend, and we've done that, so this is successful already. We've gotten everybody's attention, and we need everybody's input to help develop these standards. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for ideas that improve this. So we'd appreciate that.
Again, my name is Mark Schnell. I will do my best to be as constructive as humanly possible. I am an urban designer and a planner. I'm happy to be associated with the group that Gary describes, the Small Business Association. Also a small business owner, both a retail store as well as my private practice as an urban designer. I deal with parking issues on a nearly daily basis. I create master plans for public and private sector clients. I write regulations for parking. I draw parking lots, all of the above. I have nightmares about parking, as you guys probably do too. It's always a thorny issue. South Walton basically has a seasonal parking issue in a few locations. And therefore, what Gary described, I think my biggest concern for us as citizens, as businesses, is the one-size-fits-all approach. It's the standards that are being proposed. It's interesting that they would be from Grayton or Point Washington, but those are places with a certain unique political spin to them. But what's proposed is actually much more significant in terms of the amount of parking required than I've seen in most suburban codes. It's very, very high levels of parking. And it's interesting because this is coming at a time when some places are actually dropping their parking requirements. They're eliminating them altogether on the theory that they want to create an active place with lots of people walking, lots of people out. And to some degree, it's even somewhat self-limiting. But what those places tend to do, and I really would urge us as a county to do, is to begin to look at ways that we can include parking that do not include giant parking lots. The answer is largely about spreading it out, and it's using the public right-of-ways as best we can. Parallel parking, small parking lots spread out over different places, public sector being involved. It's when you require that every single business or every single house have this giant parking lot. We have several different things that happen. One is you spread everything out. So our nice, compact, walkable, charming South Walton that we all love all of a sudden looks a lot more like Destin and Panama City. Everything gets all spread out. Much harder to walk from one place to another when you have to cross a parking lot every single time. That's a huge, huge concern. We would not have some of the places that we love. We wouldn't have, ironically, Grayton. Grayton wouldn't be like it is if we had these parking rules in place. So what I'm urging instead is to really focus in on each neighborhood and do a parking plan that considers the public needs, like you're talking about for the beaches, for the business needs that are overflow. They're really just overflow, seasonal, important times, that include parking for residences that's adequate. I mean, I know some folks don't want people to park in the right-of-way in front of their house, but it's not their land. It's public right-of-way. So we can, as a community, come together and say, this is a walkable district. This is our version of small-town urbanism. We want this to be walkable. We want it to be transit-friendly, and we're going to design it as such. And therefore, we need parking rules that actually reflect that. And then in other places, rural places, there's no need for this stuff. We're totally good. So I would just urge a much more site-specific approach. Otherwise, we're really, I think, really risking losing what is special about this place over time. I think the last thing we all want is parking lot after parking lot, more impervious surface, which means more retention ponds, which means longer walking distances, which means less of the intimate scale that we all love. So that would be my 2 cents. I'm happy to talk with you more about it. Again, I share your daily grind of parking, and it's a thorny issue, but we have a parking problem because we're such a desirable place. And people show up in droves, and they need somewhere to park. Let's build them better sidewalks to ride their bikes. Let's put transit in. Let's put in parallel parking spots. We can keep this place the place we love without, sort of a big blanket approach. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Eddie Foster with Alice Beach. We just got this new revised. Eddie Foster. Excuse me, I'm not used to this. Say it again. Eddie Foster with Alice Beach. We just got the revised parking ordinance today and realized that y'all had changed the residential. My first question is this going to apply to PUDs that have deviations already established from the land
No, it
development
will not.
code? It will not apply
No.
to that, okay. We have no further.
All right, thank you, Eddie. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Stone with President of the Frangista Homeowners Association. And I know Mr. Snell talks about wanting to keep the character, have walkable neighborhoods. Well, that's exactly our problem. We have large, huge homes that take up the entire lot. All the people park on streets. If you come to Frangista, our streets were built in the 1950s. So, yes, there was no planning and development plan, apparently, when the county allowed all the large homes to be built. We have children, and it is a year-round problem. It's not just a spring break problem. We have children and families. We have no sidewalks that constantly walk the streets. I have expressed safety issues, and the fire chief also has expressed those same safety issues. Now, I agree from listening to everyone this afternoon, maybe this should not be a county-wide ordinance, but maybe it should be in all the tourist areas, because again, the people have to park somewhere. I mean, they have nowhere to park. They come here and the house takes up the entire lot, so then they park on streets that are almost impossible for two cars to pass already. And then you add the tourists walking up and down the street, and there is another problem. We now have a new neighborhood going into the back of us called Villas of Frangista. It was originally, the development order was for 72 homes. It now has ballooned to well over 200, maybe 300. I hear now they plan to actually divide the estate lots into many more small lots and add to our problem. They have no entrance from New 98. It was planned where everybody in that entire neighborhood will go through the one street Miami, which already has the huge homes with everybody parking on the streets. And we can't even get a fire truck. They couldn't even get in during spring break when they were trying to get into the houses that are having problems during spring break. My concern is death, safety issues for the small children walking up and down the streets with their wagons. Because I cannot imagine, right now we have cement trucks, transfer trucks coming down that one small road. We can't even get out of our houses, back out of our driveways. It's become a tremendous problem. So I'm not sure what we're going to do in our area. But it is a big problem. Maybe not a county-wide problem, but the people, when they come here, the tourists have to park somewhere. They should be, expectant of some parking places. Otherwise, what do they do but park on the streets? Come ride the streets in our neighborhood, and you'll see what we mean. And I don't know, I would like to know how a neighborhood with that density can be put to the back of us and told they can enter through that one street, Miami, and not have any entrance from New 98. The development order expired. The neighborhood sat there for 7 years and languished. The development order said if it did not continue in good faith, the development order would expire in 1 year. I think now they should go back and have to get a new development order.
If I could stop you right there.
Sure.
The development order was for the infrastructure. They can build with building permits on those approved lots that are properly platted and approved by the BCC.
But
The
they're now
development order has
dividing-
not expired. It was completed on that.
Even though it sat there for 7 years with no building, I don't think that continued in good faith, in my opinion, and those are the words of the development order, said it must continue in good faith. Just because some streets were put in, we now have a developer that is not the original developer. They're not building the houses that were planned in the development order. They're now dividing the lots and building houses that favor those homes not at all. So that is our problem, and I'm sure other neighborhoods have the same problem we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Anyone else?
Just one more.
Oh, David, and then
David Kramer for the record. After reviewing the ordinance, I had some questions regarding square footage. Is it defined in the ordinance, or are we defining it as, is it defined in the LDC definitions? The
square
words-
footage?
Yeah, square feet. Well, no, is it defined? I mean, according to the property appraiser's website, there's two kinds of square feet, and I need to know which one you're working on. And I think the public would like to know too, whether it's gross floor area or whether it's heated and cooled space, and I need to know how it's
Everything's
defined.
gross floor area.
It's under note number 1 at the bottom.
Excuse me, just one at a time.
Note number 1 at the bottom of the parking table there. It outlines what's included.
Where's this? What page?
404. It's at the very bottom of the table. Note 1.
Yep.
Gross square footage? Gross square feet?
Well, it excludes. It excludes porches, decks, patios. It says heated and cooled space.
Okay. Questions also regarding that then. If the residence is in any of these categories, of course, and they add a garage that they don't previously have, or if they were to heat and cool the garage, is there an exemption for that? And if there's not, maybe I would suggest that if we're adding heated and cooled square footage to a garage, a lot of people, like to have their garages heated and cooled because you rent controlled climate space all the time, that might be an exemption you want to add to the ordinance, that heated and cooled garage spaces would be exempt. And it said porches, but it didn't say enclosed porches. Enclosed porches are exempt as well. A screen porch, I don't know that they're heated and cooled typically, but can be. I just ask them that you're looking at all sides of it before you do it.
Okay.
And then the other thing I wanted to suggest is, two things really. One was the use of site-specific on the ordinance, just dealing with the problem and not the whole blanket issue the way you've approached it. I understand that we may have those problems in the future, countywide at some point, and I don't know that we even wish for that kind of success. But if we could include, my suggestion would be a map of where you deem the problem areas are, and include that as a solution for dealing with the specifics of the problem, or if it could be land use category specific in certain zones on the map, say just south of the bay. That may be another way to define it in either of those two methodologies. And specific to your ordinance, without any of those things taken into account, I have some suggestions also. That on page 2 of 4, where you use the residential uses and go up and down 1 through 8, I would limit it at 1 through 6 and change number 6 to stay more than 3,500 square feet. Delete the other ones and add the additional language that you have in the back of number 8 where it says additional parking spaces for each. I would take that to 1 additional parking space for every 500 square feet above 3,500 square feet. I think you wouldn't add so much of the parking lot issues. You're looking and still get the resolution for the largest percentage of development properties that we have. I'd ask you for that for your consideration, and good luck.
All right, thank you, David. All right, I believe we had some in the back. Anyone else? Flexifield?
Sandra Luchtfeld, property owner, South Walton. 7e0e8be8, as in Frank, ELD as in David. Thank you for taking on this very difficult task of talking about parking. It is an issue. I'd like to say that Frangista Beach is a very good litmus test of what all is going to happen throughout the rest of South Walton. We've seen that time and time again. It starts there and moves our direction very rapidly. I think from the area I'm from, the requirements you have for privately owned houses look fine. There may be some areas they don't look fine for. But I would like to see the county employees continue along the vein of trying to protect our area and continue to make good ordinances. And thanks to everyone who has come today to offer solutions.
Thank you. All right, anyone else like to speak on the commercial, the parking for residential parking? Anyone else? Ms. Letcher?
Betty Letcher, Inlet Beach. I really appreciate y'all looking at the residential parking. Inlet Beach is all of a sudden on the south side has really become, it's going to be a problem. We have very small streets. We have pretty much year-round people, tourists there. And with the idea of parking on the right-of-way, then you couldn't get your car hardly down, and especially a fire truck. So we are starting to get some monster houses at Inlet Beach like there is at Grayton Beach. And so I really appreciate y'all looking at this. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. All right, anyone else like to speak to the... I'm sorry, yes, sir.
Hani Nasri, property owner in Walton County. Looking at this parking requirement, I'm one of your builders, and I also own Marie's Bistro. It is quite impossible to imagine a family growing up and want to add a room or convert a room for their children to play in and tell them, sorry, you can't add a room on your house because now you're going to have to add another parking space for that baby coming up. It's very, very difficult that I lived here for 30 years, imagining homes that get destroyed and can't be rebuilt back, because now these homes have to be rebuilt much smaller and have huge parking lots in front of them if they wish to build it as big as it was. I definitely in total opposition of this, and I know we need to work on a better plan of parallel and street parking. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Colleen Kricka. Just had a couple questions. Is there going to, excuse me, Colleen Kricka, Krika. Is there going to be another workshop?
Yes,
after
October
this
2nd.
one?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if we wanted to have someone that went and really studied this and came up with some better ideas, we could have that person come at
Yes,
that
ma'am.
point? Or can we send those to you in
But
between
either way would be
now and
fine.
then?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
because I do see it as, it is a problem. I certainly agree it's a problem, but I'm like the lawyer, Mr. Shipman. We don't need to lump everybody and everything in just one specific paragraph. So I'm very concerned with that. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Colleen. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Mary Nielsen. I believe that there needs to be a separation in the thought process between rental homes in South Walton and primary residences. And let's using Point Washington as the example of, say, a residential neighborhood that's primarily local people, as compared to vacation rental properties. Our serious issues are all up and down South Walton from Bay County to Okaloosa County. Doesn't matter what neighborhood it is, doesn't matter if it's a private development inside a gated community or if it's a freestanding lot that abuts 30A or Old 98 or subsequent south of 98 in the Miramar area. The conversion of a primary residence to a vacation rental property is where you see the expansion and you see the resulting problems. This is not isolated. This is not, you can't laugh about one particular neighborhood over another. It covers the ballgame. We all know the PUDs are exempt, but we have to get a grip. Regardless of the ideal of a walkable community, we have existing neighborhoods that are severely impacted by the residential vacation rental expansion of the bedrooms. Okay, when you have a home with 5 bedrooms in Point Washington and it's mom and dad and their children or grandma, live-in maid or grandma or set of parents, how they use that property and what they do there and how many cars they bring and how many cars are impacting the neighborhood is a very different scenario than a 5-bedroom home south of 30A or in Miramar that has double bunk beds on the bottom, single bunk beds on the top, and they designed the room so that you could have 2 walls of that. So that bedroom alone will sleep 6 people. Just one bedroom will sleep 6 people. And when you multiply that, how the people arrive and depart from that property, they're not walking there with their suitcases. They have no intention of staying there without their vehicles. And they come and they split up, whether it's all a bunch of teenagers or whether it's a bunch of senior citizens or who they are, girls weekend out or week out. There are so many cars piled in there that they're all over the neighbor's property. They're all open down the street, and it's not isolated. You can have a luxury neighborhood, you can have a less luxury neighborhood, and the problem is the sleeping in the bedrooms, and the best approach is the square footage, in my opinion. And it's done elsewhere. We're not inventing some magical new process here. So I think we need to separate what's real from what we would love it to be the walkable neighborhood, but reality says they come with multiple vehicles, and they're all over, abusing the sidewalks, abusing the streets, abusing the neighbors, knocking down, getting drunk and knocking down their mailboxes, etc. And then they're gone. They're gone in 7 days, and you're left with the mess. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? Mr. Shipman, yes, sir.
As I listen to people talk, it seems to me, and living in South Walton, as Ms. Nilsson just pointed out, there is a distinction between, there are many neighborhoods and communities in South Walton that don't allow short-term rental. And it seems to me that as I'm hearing the community speak, and even y'all up here at this table, what you are considering as the problem that you want to address is short-term rental houses in South Walton County at the beach, and not everybody else. So again, I would ask that as you're looking at this, for example, I'm not here on behalf of them, but I happen to represent approximately 100 associations down here. Many of them are non-rental. Why would you punish someone who can afford a very large house in a non-rental community who's not going to have 14 cars at their house with requiring them to have a parking lot at their house? Because I think any home that is not a short-term rental home, I can't fathom why you would ever need more than 6 parking spaces. If that's where somebody truly lives, if that's their home, or if that's a home that they truly use only for their vacation. So again, I think we have a fly in the room, and we're trying to kill the fly with a sledgehammer. I think this needs to be rethought, what you're trying to accomplish here. Because it doesn't sound like the problem is, in general, single-family residential homes. And I cannot imagine a single-family home that is where people live or long-term renters reside, needing to have 8 or 10 or 14 or 16 or however many parking spaces we're talking about. And I would hate to see South Walton County asphalted over to accomplish that if it's not a part of the problem. Thank you.
Should we just kind of just add some information for that? I know about a year and a half ago we were looking at some other issues we were having with rental properties, and at that time we were told by some of our attorneys that there had been some legislation that had been passed in the state legislature that basically says you can't treat rental properties differently than owner-occupied properties, and that's something that we've been dealing with. And again, that's something we can explore again. I do think you're right. The majority of the problems that we're having, the majority probably does reside with the rental properties. But again, one of the issues that we were informed of, again, a year and a half ago or so, was that there is a prohibition in state law dealing with rental properties the same way you deal with owner-occupied properties. So just for that, just something we can explore for the next meeting for sure, and kind of get to the bottom of that issue as well. All right, anything else for residential? Yes, sir.
If the problems seem to be, as he says, Alan Fakir, if as he said, the problems seem to be mainly with the short-term rentals, and all short-term rentals do have to collect bed taxes, you do have a method of being able to identify which.
No, we don't have access to information.
Private information not available to anyone other than the tax collector. We don't have a list of bed tax collectors, and we're prevented by state law from creating that list. We don't know who they are. It's voluntary.
Oh, really?
Yes, sir.
All right.
That's the law.
Right now, you're just taking comments on residential?
Yes, sir. Yes.
If you wait about 2 seconds, you can do the commercial. But if you wait about 2 seconds, we'll go into commercial. All right, anything else residential? If not, then we'll move into the commercial properties. And again, same thing, if you would please give us your name and one at a time, and I'll call you up. All right. Mr. Shipman. I'm sorry. Let me have Tim give a brief overview, Mr. Shipman, then we'll go to your comments.
Okay. Currently, we have no standard for outdoor seating. So one of the things we're proposing is a standard for outdoor seating. Right now, you can put as many outdoor tables, chairs, whatever, and you don't have to provide any parking whatsoever. So that's one of the standards. We've also changed banks, restaurants, and other business and personal service based on other local governments in our area. Scambia, Santa Rosa, Okaloosa, Bay, Fort Walton Beach, Destin, Panama City Beach. Those standards are more relaxed than just about every one of the local governments around us. So those changes are based on those other local governments. We're reducing what the reduction for compact cars. We don't see that much. It's only in the 98 scenic corridor. So we're not doing away with it, but we're reducing the amount of compact spaces that you can have. We are completely repealing the joint use and off-site parking facilities. It just really hasn't worked. These are shared parking between businesses. Business goes out of business. The new owner comes in and buys it, doesn't know anything about sharing the parking. It just really hasn't worked. So we're proposing to completely delete and repeal that. And the same with the project-specific waiver of general requirements. This is where you can demonstrate that the parking requirement is excessive, that your business doesn't require that much parking. We've hardly ever had anyone apply for this. We really haven't seen it work, so we're proposing to repeal and delete that as well.
All right, moving along. Ms. Shipman, you wanted to?
Again, my comments now are on behalf of the South Walton Small Business Owners Association. As you can probably guess, with the number of people in here, this is a rather particularly hot button issue for them. I want to first address, before I even get on problems we have, inconsistencies within the changes themselves that seem peculiar with no rhyme or reason to me. And I want to start with restaurants. You have three categories of restaurants. You have standard restaurants that require one space per 100 square feet of gross floor area, which the way it's written would include kitchens, storage, and bathrooms, plus one space per every 2 employees on their largest shift, plus, which frankly I don't even know how you would calculate that, since I think it would vary, plus for all outdoor seating, one space per 3 seats for booths and tables and one space per 2 counter seats. So if you took on a standard restaurant, just to use an example, we had a 5,000 square foot restaurant, and on their largest shift they had 12 employees, and they had 5 outdoor tables that seated 20 people. They would have to have 63 parking spaces. Then your next category is a fast food restaurant. And you say there that you have to have one space per 100 square feet of gross floor area, but you exclude the kitchens, the food and drink preparation, the restrooms, and the storage. But you do require them to have one space per 2 employees and the outdoor seating. So if we took the same imaginary building and it was 5,000 square feet, but now it's categorized as a fast food restaurant, which, by the way, I didn't see a definition in the planning code for that. And you said that the kitchen, the restrooms, the food and drink preparation, the storage area accounted for 2,000 square feet of it, but otherwise they were identical to the other restaurant. This group would only have to have 36 plus would only have to have 43 spaces. I fail to see the difference. Then we go to a hotel that has a restaurant. And if the hotel has a restaurant, again, it's you have 10 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area, so I guess it would be the same thing as one space per every 100 square feet. But now you're counting the kitchen and the restrooms and the food preparation area and the storage space. You have the outdoor seating requirement, but you don't have the requirement for the employees. So if we then use the imaginary 5,000 square foot restaurant, they would, and that had the outdoor seating, they would have to have 57 spaces. I really don't understand why we're making a difference between the three. It would seem they would all be essentially the same. Then we get into the problem of the requirement that you're expanding this to with the, where you're taking a restaurant and basically increasing their parking requirement by 50%. Again, I assume we're talking about South Walton County here. This would not apply to a restaurant that was in a community that was a DRI. So, for example, the gentleman from Alice Beach wouldn't have to worry about it, or somebody in Rosemary. It would be the little guy that would have to worry about it. I've ridden around down here on 30A. I don't think there's a single restaurant on 30A that could meet this requirement, not one. So what does that mean? Hurricane Opal comes through here again and wipes them out, levels the building, they're out of business. Unless they can figure out a way to create a parking lot that's humongous. You've eliminated the ability to seek any relief from the planning director because you've eliminated the ability to waive it. You've eliminated the ability to have things like, for example, right now in Grayton Beach, we have Grayton Corners that, except for the convenience store, is largely during the day businesses, and the Red Bar, which is largely nighttime business, and they have an agreement to utilize Grayton Corners parking lot at night. You've eliminated that. You've basically created an issue where we are going to asphalt over the area or eliminate restaurants down in South Walton County, period, unless you're a gigantic chain that can afford to buy the land to create these kinds of parking lots. Now, Walton County's economy is largely based on small businesses. In fact, the reality of it is, in this county, you could count the number, and by definition, a small business is someone that employs less than 50 people. You could count on your fingers the number of large businesses there are in this entire county. They're Publix, Walmart, Lowe's, a few other companies like that. There are no other large businesses. Well over 90% of all the non-government created jobs in this county come from small business owners. You are suggesting that passing an ordinance that if there is a major storm event will destroy small business in this county. It will hurt the economy of this county. It will put people out of work where they won't go back to work. My office is in an office complex on 283. That office complex consists of, I believe, 4 restaurants, Frank's Cash and Carry hardware store, there's a chiropractor's office, there's the Grayton Gym, there's a surveyor's office, a couple of builders' offices, and amazingly, one of the Walton County Commissioner's offices. Now, the Walton County Commissioner is okay because there is no category for governmental buildings here. Although if the governmental building had to comply with the general business, her office wouldn't meet these parking requirements either. So if a storm came through and devastated our complex, none of us could rebuild. I don't think that when I read the preamble to this ordinance, and we talk about the Board of County Commissioners finds it is in the best interest of the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Walton County to amend these requirements, that is, in fact, if you think about it, something that they want. Why would we want an ordinance that has the potential to put out of business a significant portion of the small business owners in this county? Again, like I talked about on the residential, and one last point I wanted to make out, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, but the project-specific waiver of general representation, the way it is written in this design code, it's not just pertaining to commercial, that pertains to residential as well. So that takes your ability, that house that's in the no rental neighborhood, that has covenants and restrictions, they can't appeal to you to waive this 14 parking space requirement. Like I said before.
If I could ask you a question.
Sure.
If we leave the project-specific waiver in there, that addresses the North Walton point you were making, and that addresses these points right here.
It would, in the sense that if you had a planning director, it doesn't tie the planning director's hands, though. That planning director, I could use my example of the farm, and I could have a planning director that simply either was recalcitrant or wanted to play favors and say, gee, I'm sorry, Gary, I know you got 90 acres, and I know you don't own 14 cars. I know you don't even like particularly cars and drive an old pickup truck, but I'm going to make you build a parking lot on your farm anyway. And they could do it.
And I think anytime there's a waiver granted, to me, there needs to be criteria associated with that the planning director or whoever's making this decision would have to follow the criteria given. That would be one solution.
And I do think if we're really going down this road, you ought to consider a criteria that, based on what everybody was saying, and I haven't looked at this for a legal opinion, so I'm not attempting to give you a legal opinion. In fact, I'm here as a spokesperson for the small business group, not as a lawyer. But it sounds to me like there is a big world of difference between houses in neighborhoods that are where people live and truly commercial rental property.
I think there is, but we're still stuck with the state law that says we can't treat them differently.
Well, and if that's true, I would suggest that what you're suggesting to do is basically because of a small group of people, you basically want to impose a restriction that harms virtually everyone who actually lives in this county full time. Going back to what I said on the residential, we have our own planner that we would like to have speak to you on the technical terms, who's far smarter than I as to the effects of asphalting over the county and the stormwater and the pollution and everything else that it would create. So I would ask that he be allowed to speak next. And
Yes, sir.
I'm going to sit down. Thank you.
Hey, Mark, give me 1 second. I think Tim wants to make a quick comment.
Sure.
The reason these are treated differently, a standard and a fast food, is it's a time element. A standard, you're there at least 1 hour. Fast food, it's constantly turning over. That's why you need less spaces. That's why it excludes the size, because it's constantly turning over.
If that's the case, then why is it that a grocery store, because I think about it when I go to Publix, I'm usually in a car by myself, and I go into Publix, and I'm probably in Publix as long as I am when I eat in a restaurant, but the grocery store has a lesser parking requirement than the restaurant. And when I go to a restaurant, I usually have my wife with me, unless I want to be in trouble, and I'm not there any longer than I am in a grocery store, so that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
That follows the shopping center requirement, which is 5 spaces per 1,000. And the idea is much larger developments that generate a much larger number of parking spaces, and therefore the ratio is a lesser ratio than a small restaurant.
But that's not what it says. It says right here, grocery store or supermarket, 1 space per 200 square feet.
Right.
Regardless of what
Shopping
they
center,
are.
1 space per 200 square feet.
So a restaurant is going to have 1 space for every 100 square feet.
Restaurants are typically much smaller buildings, so the total parking that's required for that smaller building is going to have a higher ratio.
Well, then how do you explain a convenience store, which is also 1 space for every 200 square feet? And most convenience stores, at least the ones I go to, they aren't any bigger than or aren't any larger than a restaurant.
We'd welcome a suggestion to increase the parking at a convenience store. I can't think of one that wouldn't do more business if they had more parking area.
See, I think the problem is you're trying to fix an existing problem with a future development code, which gets back to what I started with, which is what really needs to be done here is we need to look at the overall problem, because it already exists. I think we already agree that during spring break and from Memorial Day to at least the beginning of August, in certain areas of South Walton County, there's a problem with parking. Now, and you're not going to close down existing businesses. You might do it after we have a storm. So the solution is we need to be having that consultant that I asked y'all about earlier, who's talking about public parking, who's talking about public transportation, who's talking about additional roadways, be included in this conversation, because the development code alone, in fact, the development code at best is a very small part of the solution. And I'm concerned when I hear that those issues are being addressed somewhere else by some consultant that nobody seems to know anything about, while we're trying to amend the development code that really harms property owners and business owners down here. With that, I thank you, and I'm going to let the planner talk to you.
All right. Thank you, Gary and Mark.
Hi, I'm back, Mark Schnell. Just wanted to, I think, and I don't mean this to be in any way snarky or grandstanding, but I think you hit the nail on the head with that comparing us to Okaloosa or Bay or the surrounding communities. The problem is I don't think anyone in the room wants us to be that. And so again, looking at just sort of the long-term issue with this, the rules you're proposing are essentially that of a suburban strip environment. They end up with a building sitting in the middle of a very large parking lot all the way around it. It's the Walgreens McDonald's model. That's what they have to our east. That's what they have to our west. That's the reason everybody lives here, is because they don't want that. So when you set these big long-term rules, let's just make them so that they don't create that. And instead, looking for ideas today, the idea is let's create a master plan for Seagrove. Let's consider where the parking should go. Let's just acknowledge that some of the restaurants were built with probably too little parking, okay, originally. That's fine. Help create what we have, so it's great. Let's accommodate it through on-street parking, through small lots, through the things that we can do. Let's accommodate it through traffic. Let's do the same for Blue Mountain Beach. Let's do the same for Inlet Beach. I'm not talking these old neighborhood plans that were sort of politically driven. Get some people in here who know what they're talking about. Do great neighborhood plans with consultants who know where to put all the ins and outs of the parking. I just really, really don't think in the end we want a place that's filled with that model of standalone building surrounded by a parking lot. And we know how to do it. Parallel parking is not some weird thing. It's done in every city and town in America. For some odd reason, it's done here only when somebody has, I don't know, the political muscle to get it in front of their business. Everyone else gets a sign in front, a series of signs that says no parking. If we had just a rational reason, because, I mean, the reality is Old Seagrove has different needs and wants than Inlet Beach does. So let's go in, do plans for each one, and I think in the end you're going to know, hey, we only have a few beach accesses. Maybe that's the answer, when it comes to something like that, is maybe we need a few more beach accesses. Therefore, we'll spread out the people using those regional lots. For the restaurants, we can say, hey, we need to add a little parallel parking on 30A in front of this particular place. But I don't think we can get there unless we actually go in and do a plan. So that's my suggestion to you today.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, sir.
Again, Haney Nasri, Marie's Bistro, and Nasri's Construction. We were very fortunate that we are in Blue Mountain Beach right now. We started with a small 1 unit in our building, and after a year, the 2 other units became vacant, and we were fortunate that we were able to expand. The building department gave us a permit or the blessing to go ahead and expand the restaurant. According to the state of Florida, in Walton County, you have to have 4,000 square feet to obtain a liquor license. We build a restaurant, have a bar, have a liquor license. With the new ordinance, what would that put us if any, God forbid, disaster happened, fire or hurricane or and so forth? What would that put us in case of any of that occurs to our business? If I have to follow the new guidelines, and I'm going to have 52 parking spots, of course, Mr. Carpenter knows I have 26 and squeezing 26. So either I'm going to have a smaller building, which will now take away the liquor license, or get out of the area. What is the solution? How can we remedy that according to your plans? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nasri, and that speaks directly to one of our concerns. And this is not just a concern from the planning department, this is a concern from the neighborhood, or series of neighborhoods. And let me just give you an example. We approve a restaurant, whether it's new construction or whether it's an existing building where someone goes in to open a restaurant. And let's just say that restaurant is 3,500 square feet. Not enough to qualify, and we approve it, and we size the parking based on 150 square feet per space at that 3,500 square foot restaurant. But once we get the CO on the restaurant, or we get our certificate of land use compliance for that particular building going into, our restaurant going into an existing building, the next application we get is an application for zoning approval for a 2COP or a 6COP SRX liquor license, which is the flavor that most of you guys have out here, that requires the 4,000 square feet and 100 seats at tables. Now, those 100 seats at tables typically don't fit inside the building. So those tables and seats are drawn on the plan, on the porch. They're drawn out in the yard. You draw a line around that. If that's 4,000 square feet, you meet the requirements under the special act from 1967 that the State Beverage Department uses to issue you a liquor license for a restaurant serving 51% food. So that obviously makes the restaurant more successful. I doubt anybody in here who has a restaurant probably does have a liquor license to serve hard liquor. It seems to be one of those success points for a restaurant in Walton County, whether it's in South Walton or North Walton. But our problem becomes we have no way to assess a parking impact, which is obvious once you start filling out an outside area with tables and chairs. You're adding more customers that you can serve at the same time, which reduces the amount of turnover for that particular restaurant in the parking spaces. So first of all, we now have a restaurant that had the right amount of parking until they qualified for a liquor license. We have no way to assess the impact of the additional seating and the capacity of the restaurant that's created by granting the liquor license zoning approval and subsequently getting the liquor license issued. Now, the other thing that does is makes the restaurant much more popular. People stay longer, which reduces the turnover in the existing parking that was not based on a restaurant that has a liquor license. So we're looking for solutions to this particular problem, and we welcome anybody's ideas.
Thank you, Matt. All right. Anyone else want to speak to the commercial parking standards? Anyone else? Who did? David?
Appreciate the opportunity to speak again. Regarding the commercial standards, after review of them, it seems that the problem you're trying to solve is you're taking it on beyond the scope of it, which is typical for when you have opportunity to, you just want to make it a little better, a little better, a little better, and workshop it out. But I think you need to get back to the root of what originally was. Max spoke to it directly, and I think it should be just that and only that. Yes, you know, people take the opportunity to exceed the limits of the code when they get an opportunity to bring in new business and make their business more successful, and government doesn't have a wherewithal to bring it into the safety standard, health and welfare of the community at large. So my suggestion is to leave all the square footage numbers that you have in the original code alone. Don't change any of them. Don't change the 150, the banks, the general business, anything. You want to correct the problem, leave, yes, direct it toward the outdoor parking. And I'm not going to be the one to suggest it because I'm not a restaurateur. You guys have the parking problems, you get the feedback from the community, and you have the experts all out here who can tell you realistically what the time and the turnover and things is for those particular problems. We do need a medium for government to exceed some bit of control over problems. And this problem is generated basically by the idea that no outdoor parking has been allowed to be governed. So it's an opportunity to govern it, and what means I suggest that you govern it is leave all existing square footages that you have alone. Banks aren't a problem. General businesses aren't a problem. Don't mess with them. If restaurants are a problem, let's do it in baby steps. Start with the outdoor parking, and if in fact you get a consensus from the business community that future restaurants' floor square area ratios need to come down, great. But let's not tackle that at this time. Let's just concentrate on the problem. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. All right. Anyone else want to speak to the commercial parking standards? Anyone else? Yes, sir. Your name, sir?
My name is Steve Springer. I was given a copy of this proposal, I guess, and I was surprised to see that the Board of Commissioners, the commissioners, apparently have the expertise to know that we should have 5 spaces per lane at a bowling alley.
Mr. Springer, let me stop you right there. This is something that staff has produced. We've worked on. The commissioners have authorized us to open the discussion about parking, but they have not approved or anything else as far as the changes in the ordinance today.
But these are proposed changes, right?
Exactly, but the
Bowling alley is not being proposed to be changed.
That's
Well,
been
it
that way
says-
since
oh,
at least
it-
91.
It's 5 spaces per lane for bowling alley, but I just I question the credibility of the Board of Commissioners. When they're talking about 5 spaces per lane for bowling alley, they have their own expertise in miniature golf. There'll be 3 spaces per hole. They've got expertise in skating rinks, schools.
Mr. Springer, I hate to stop you right there, but are these the changes or these the existing you're speaking of?
This is the
I think this
proposal,
is
I believe.
No, if it's,
If it's not in strike through and underline, it's not proposed to be changed.
and I believe a lot of these standards have not been changed at least since 91.
Well,
So whatever happened in 91.
What I know is that there's a proposal to change the restaurants, I believe.
Right.
And
That
in
is
our
correct.
case, in the case that in a restaurant that I'm involved with, we would go from something like 40 spaces to something like 82 spaces. And to say that I think that that's absurd would be an understatement, a dramatic understatement. And I would just, I would like to suggest that the commissioners who apparently were elected as Republicans might want to check the Republican agenda and find out what the Republican Party stands for, and maybe we should consider that when we go to vote next time and see that we have, some people would say the Communist Party proposing to regulate businesses here in Walton County.
Are you saying that these standards are communist in nature? Is that what I understand you to say?
I'm saying that this must be the Karl Marx department of the Republican Party.
Because do you realize that every state in the United States has regulations like this?
Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, and I'm also aware that Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest people on the planet, came out today or yesterday who had supported Obama and said that we should repeal Obamacare. The government
We're talking about parking, not.
The government is not particularly the people up there that have all the expertise about bowling alleys and putting greens and restaurants and healthcare facilities. It's a little absurd. Thank you very much.
We understand you don't want any regulation. That's fine. Okay. Yes, sir.
My name's Tony Anderson. I think the majority of the people in this room are businessmen. And we're here to try to help you solve the problem. But I don't think of one of us that owns a business in this whole room agree that this is business friendly. Now we understand there's problems, but the gentleman that said his restaurant would have to go from 40 to 82 parking spaces on property that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a foot, How is that business friendly? You're wondering why we're here. We want to help. But some of this stuff is just ridiculous. We do have parking problems. We are a tourist community. Guess what? Every tourist community has parking problems during the season. And to just change the whole thing because we have problems is not the answer. The answer is we've got to have better transportation. That, we know that. We've got to have better off-site parking. We know that. But I've got a friend in this room, and I'm not going to name his name. He owns a business that has 18 parking places. I go by and see him every day. I've never seen half his parking places full, and he is a very successful businessman. By these ordinance, if he had a storm and had to rebuild, he would have to have over 40 parking places. That makes no sense to me. The problem with, and I'm not blaming you guys, you're doing your job, I understand that. But we all know the problem with government. They see a small problem and they use massive change to fix it. We want to help you guys understand this, but this is not the answer. No business in Walton, in South Walton County, if we have a storm, can be rebuilt to this standard, except Publix and Walmart. Do we want to go out and close down every business in Walton County? Thank you. That's all I got.
Thank you, Chairman. All right, anyone else want to speak to the commercial parking standards? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
My name is Bob Ward, and I'm a homeowner. One problem I have is, and forgive me because sometimes I'm not nice the way I say things, and I don't mean to be unnice, but some of the developers have crammed, just when they first started developing, they crammed as much business as they could in a little space. And then they said, well, we'll worry about it later on, about the parking. And the gentleman back here was talking about putting on-street parking. Well, where I live, the developer just crammed a pile of businesses. I mean, a pile of businesses in there. The businesses, the cars can't park in there. So what they started doing, they started parking on the street. Well, the sheriff department put on the street, no parking till always on or something, 2 signs. Cars still park there. I mean, they've got to, right where the signs are, the cars are still parking there. When you come out of that place, it's so busy in the on season. You come out, people are pulling out of the developer's area. They're pulling out in the street, so you've got those people to worry about. You've got cars going down 38 both ways. You've got those to worry about. You've got cyclists and walkers going down the bike path there. You've got those to worry about. You've got people that are parking illegally. You've got those to worry about. So it concerns me that and I'm not against the development, so understand this. But it's terrible when you've got developers that say, we're going to jam as much in here because we're only concerned about the bottom line. We want to get everything we can. We want to make as many bucks as we can. And we'll just worry about later on what's going on. And it really concerns me because it's dangerous where we live. Twice, because of the people illegally parking, twice I've about gotten in an accident. I've had a neighbor that's about gotten in an accident pulling out of our residential area. And my wife has gotten in an accident. And I know of those 3 people that have almost been in accidents. So, it just concerns me that and I hear what the developers are saying, what I shouldn't say developers, the business people are saying. But we do have a problem, but, and I don't know what the problem is, because if I did, be up there where you guys are. But it really concerns me that we're wanting on-street parking. And I guess that's where I'm coming from, is on-street parking.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. All right. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Sherry Judkins, and as I don't know what a solution is, but the parking problem in South Walton has become so bad that it's not just a parking problem, it's a very serious safety problem. So something's got to be done. We can't just leave it the way that it is. I don't think that the taxpayer should have to provide parking for any business. I think any business that's in business should provide their own parking, and it should be safe. And I appreciate you guys looking into the parking problem in Walton County.
Thank you, Sherry. Yes, sir.
I'm Tony Dirk. I'm the developer that piled everything in on everybody where he was just speaking. We currently built everything to code there. We have 55 parking spaces. Should the ordinance change, we would have to have 90. Obviously, that's impossible. We did request to do parallel parking across the street, and the neighborhood I live in is the same one the gentleman just spoke in. There's been more accidents in the neighborhood where we live than on the road in front of my development. That's because the neighborhood streets are too narrow, and I did build the code. I have a very successful center, very happy with it, and I would love to build more space. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anyone else? Yes, sir, Mr. Nasser.
Thank you very much. Again, we can solve the problem with more neighborhood-friendly parking spaces. Just like, for example, in Fulham Beach, they took a pieces of land where the landing is and so forth, away from where the sound is, and people park there and walk across. The county knows that South Walton businesses bring the majority of the tax dollars to the county. We don't expect homeowners to pay for our parking spaces, but we expect that the county will also help provide some relief in neighborhoods for the tourists that come and brings money to our communities and employ our brothers and sisters. Livelihood depends on the businesses, on the small businesses. So planning should not be our problem because we inherited those businesses and those buildings. We need to think of, we have land, let's do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anyone else? Ms. Shipman?
I know y'all are probably ready to go, and I'm going to make one last quick comment. I think listening to everyone today, what we're hearing is this is a very complex problem. It didn't happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of thought to fix the problem without doing things that unnecessarily harm people. We appreciate your interest. My organization wants to work with you. We hope that the thought and energy is put into the fix, and it's not something that's done overnight without a great deal of thought, because it does impact a huge number of people. And again, that's why we are inviting every county commissioner to meet with our organization to discuss this. We do want to work with y'all to create a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it. All right. That will conclude the portion on the parking issues. Again, we have another workshop scheduled for October 2nd. We'll take about a 10-minute recess, and then we'll go on to item number 2 on our agenda. So we'll take a 10-minute recess before then. Thank you all. Yes, sir. Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, sir. Yeah, sure can. Thank you. Hello, good. Thank you. One behind you.
Something else was going to happen.
But it's just extension. I hope y'all will. Should this be in here?
We were looking at that, but when that actually happened, there was great broad support from the public and but
Thank you, Max. I know it's really hard situation we're dealing with, and I know it's really working, and everybody's fussing at me. What are you doing now? They don't have to ever build any house. That's not part of the deal. I think everybody will come back. No. Easy seat happening.
Used to be too expensive. Is there a bank at the back? Does the ITE manual come into play in helping set these standards?
Not really.
It just gives you trip distribution and total trips. If you've got vehicle trips, you're going to need parking for those vehicles.
Not really. Most parking is based on square footage.
You can do.
I mean, almost every parking standard I've ever seen is based on, and usually it's gross. Not always, but usually it's gross. Well, I may have changed. I may have put it. It's not on, but.
We started this just to do that. When I saw something that didn't do anything, I thought, well, just
But I did forget to mention the standard for how
Yeah, my wife suggested I would try.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm making so that we can take a lot of good notes. I got some good notes. Double check things.
If there's no sign saying no parking, then yes.
You're doing a good job. I'm keeping up with
It's
you.
not illegal. It's not illegal. But the sheriff has put signs
We can
around.
do it quick, so I'm underlining the main points of my stuff so we can check it.
I understand if it says no parking, you're not supposed to, but otherwise it's okay. Well, I've gotten different answers on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're the ones that adjudicate it, but that's my understanding. Unless, if there's no sign saying you can't park there, then you can't.
That makes sense.
But in some areas, there's really not room. You know, if you park on the street, it's room for cars, 2 cars to get by.
Yeah, it's completely practical.
Yeah, we get that question fairly often. And there is a provision in chapter 13 that you can have parallel parking at 30 minutes if the county commission Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was talking about county road. State, I'm not sure you're supposed to, unless it's an emergency.
And they won't, for the most part, they won't grant it. If they will grant it, but they won't.
State. Okay, well, I appreciate it.
more signs today.
Just ask Brian. He's happy you're here.
Yes, absolutely.
Taking some of the load off.
All ready? Where's all our friends? They left us. You good, Carrie? All right, let's get started back again on our agenda. We are now moving to number 2 on our agenda, which is a proposed ordinance to discuss the land uses in the LDC. If I could, I'll have Tim Brown give us a kind of an overview of what we're doing here. We have 2 parts to this: discussion of the additions to the land use in the LDC, and also discussions of deletions to the land use in the LDC as well. So, Tim, take it away.
Thank you. In 2011, the county amended the comprehensive plan through what's called the ear-based amendments. Well, they have not amended the land development code. So that's what this ordinance is trying to accomplish, is bring the land development code and the comprehensive plan into compliance with one another. So everything you see in red is where the land use is in the comprehensive plan, but not in the land development code. We're proposing to put it in the land development code. And then the strikeout is what's not in the comprehensive plan, but is in the land development code. So we're proposing to take it out. So all the land uses will be the same. All the land uses in the comprehensive plan will also be in the land development code.
So, Tim, if I understand you correctly, this is just an effort to have the LDC to be consistent with the comprehensive plan?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
All right. That being said, thanks for the explanation, Tim. We'll move on to the public comments. Again, if you would please state your name for the record when you come up, and we'll start from here. All right. Who wants to go first? Yes, sir.
My name is Leonard Anderson. I am a resident of South Walton County. I have only one thing to say about the land use code. It is so vague, so unrealistic in so many areas that it makes its use almost unusable. Why don't we attempt to begin? We have to use it as it is for a while, admittedly. But please, let's attempt to look at zoning with various categories and strict methods of having that category addressed. And let's go the right way in Walton County and do zoning instead of land use code. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson, and I agree with your sentiments. It's very uncommon not to have zoning. I've said this many times. There's very few places I can think of that do not have zoning. There are a lot of forms of that. Form-based codes is an example, which is a semi-zoning process. One of the issues I think we discovered when we're here is that when I came here is that it's very difficult to go back and change or take away someone's entitlements that they have by creating a zoning that would reduce that. That's one concern. That's something we're definitely thinking about. We're definitely looking at those issues. I would agree with you that a lot of the land development code is vague, and it does need some reworking, and that's what we're here to do today. We'll have a series of these. We've got more proposals coming up that we'd like for us to explore, and so this won't be the first of some changes that we're requesting from the commission to allow us to proceed with. There are some other things too that we're looking at also modifying.
Well, there are 2 things we can do. Besides zoning, you can zone for the South Walton if you have to, and the North Walton if you have to. It doesn't have to be county-wide. It can be within a certain area. If we did that, I think we would find a lot of our problems being solved. And as far as the other part is concerned, it is possible to grandfather in those businesses that are already established.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Anderson, I agree with all your comments, and we are hoping to make things clear. When it's vague, it doesn't help us nor someone trying to use it or the citizens. So our aim is to make things very, very clear so we don't have any discrepancies. I think there's going to always be some debate about what a certain regulation may say, but if we can reduce those as much as possible, make it very clear, that's what our goal is as staff, because we like to see things that are very clear for us to follow up on and give direction to the person who's applying. So, all right, anyone else would like to speak to this portion? David?
Move right down. Well, point for question, I guess. My documents are numbered at the bottom, like page 11 of 3 and stuff like that. Before the final gets to the commissioners, I might want to change that. I don't know if it's page 11 of 3 pages. Doesn't.
And David, what we're probably going to do for the next meeting on the 2nd is we're going to have line numbers, kind of like we did with the 331 corridor. We're going to have line numbers so we can all refer to a certain line. So we'll have that ready too. But this is probably a little ways away from the commission at this point. This is going to take some more work, and
okay.
We have a meeting scheduled on the 2nd for the next workshop. We would likely potentially have more depending on the comments we get.
Well, I'm going to make a few comments. I'm going to go from mine to yours because I just got yours today, and I've got to go back and forth because mine are numbered differently from the last copy I got from you guys. So I'm going to go into, on your current one, page 11 of 3, previous page 7 of 3, neighborhood commercial. Under prohibited uses, the word bars, we had talked about this in our meeting before, and I wanted to make it public comment that that needs to be defined. I don't believe it's defined in the LDC. And lounges, we use the word lounges when we were just discussing parking, and taverns. I believe taverns probably are a restaurant operation because they might have to do with food, but Mac and I, we discussed those definitions for. My suggestion would be to either define the word bar or use something that is synonymous with everything else we're using in the LDC. Then again, right below it, we discussed in the last thing, and I wanted to find out if there are any changes, and there's not, according to this one, auto repair services and similar uses. The word similar leads a lot to the interpretation of the planning director. Whereas in this personal case, it's not a bad thing, but in future and past cases, it could have been and has been for me. So given that you're probably not going to live forever, Wayne, I would like to make the following suggestions. That either a word be used or some of the other, we discuss the terms that what similar uses might be. I think in, not necessarily neighborhood commercial, but in neighborhood commercial-like uses currently, we have things like auto detailing, window tinting, pinstriping, and or decals, which a lot of the current coffee shops put on your cars outside in the parking lot, which could be construed as similar auto repair services. I just want to be sure that if they are or are not, that you guys have considered them and either make them exceptions to the ordinance or, and they are prohibited uses, so that it's clear, or that if they are not quote unquote repair services, because or just delete the words and similar uses and just leave it auto repair services, because the accessory stuff, I'm not so sure that we want to take that out of the small business community, but we might in neighborhood commercial, because I'm just giving an opinion here and I don't know what the overall intent. You guys see a bigger picture than I do. Bringing those up for your consideration. Further down in neighborhood commercial, the words outdoor storage, outdoor broadcasting, or music, it's not supposed to be outdoor broadcasting of music, is it? Is it just outdoor broadcasting or music? Anything outdoor, I guess?
I believe it should be of
the
music.
intent.
Outdoor
outdoor broadcasting and outdoor music.
Okay, well, I just wanted to know what the intent was. I have a problem with one of the things because it contravenes current scenic corridor provisions. It's my understanding and interpretation of where this is by looking at the future land use map that almost primarily all the neighborhood commercial land uses are located on County Road 30A. I don't know, there may be one or two in the Great Beach area, but they are still probably on scenic corridor because they're on the east, north, south parts of the scenic corridor. It conflicts with what's existing. Outdoor display of merchandise, specifically in art neighborhoods and stuff like that. My suggestion is going to be that the display of goods be stricken from this because it's allowed everywhere else on County Road 30A. And it's seemingly not a problem. You can put your boats out there, your kayaks, your artwork, your canoes, your bicycles. And I don't think that's something that this particular, it's so prohibitive and restrictive anyway that I think that that's not something we want on, I think we want to allow that on 30A still, and my recommendation would be, for whatever purposes, to delete the display of goods portion of this as prohibited use. I think it's still allowable use. And in the last sentence right there under outdoor display, it says where it does not conflict with the scenic guidelines. Okay, this is a determination made by case, but it doesn't say by who. It said this determination, I guess it's just the BCC makes that determination, not the planning director?
BCC because it's a conditional use.
Okay, and it says where it does not conflict with the scenic corridor guidelines. My suggestion would be in this case to delete the words and where it does not conflict with the scenic corridor guidelines. They just let them leave a decision on there, and if it conflicts with it, it still leaves it in the hands of the BCC, particularly in display of outdoor merchandise and stuff like that. If we leave the language in, and it's something like bicycles, that could be a use that the BCC would deem an allowable use in there. If we don't, if we could just remove the words where it does not conflict with scenic guidelines, that leaves the BCC more latitude to make things a little more workable. And while I'm on neighborhood commercial, I know it's probably not exactly in here, or maybe this isn't the place to put it in. As we have discussed recently that neighborhood commercial has a problem in under the RP designation guideline because all neighborhood commercial is within 250 or 200 feet of an RP. And we know that how can we be promoting any further uses of NC until we get that problem resolved? And I just want to take this opportunity to let you know that I'm still going to be on it, hoping that you all are working toward getting that problem resolved so that that there's no conflict between this new ordinance and the existing ordinance that we have under RP. And the simple, easy fix to me in that is if you can add into that ordinance just the words neighborhood commercial as being one of the exemptions that are already currently allowed under there, seems to be the simplest, easiest fix to me, and would allow a lot more businesses that we want in this limited commercial thing to actually move forward and not be stifled by and have people just so frustrated by it, you know. My suggestion.
That's one thing. That's one of the things I think we are evaluating, and looking at. We're having some discussions about the next group of changes we want to propose, and so that'll be
not quick enough to go in here, huh?
I don't think so.
Dang it.
Well, we're kind of doing
Is I under the understanding that I didn't look in the new one. Is the DRI thing completely deleted, or is it still in here? Huh? Thought we had discussed that DRI language was going to be removed completely from this, but it's not, huh? It's going to stay in here. Mixed use DRI MU. That's okay.
David, real quick, Tim, this is exactly from the ear-based amendments, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have any issues with it personally. I just thought from previous meetings we had that was going to be one of the things that was deleted. And
Well, what has been deleted is the special area plan for Blackstone.
Oh, okay.
That was deleted by a large-scale amendment. And if we have new developments of regional impact, you come forward for approval. One of the conditions we got approval on the land use change for their property to DRA mixed use is they create a special area plan, and that special area plan becomes a component of this land use
And did we change any of the language, or is this all coming out of the LDC2 for the second town center TC2? That there was, without reading the both of them, I didn't pull the older one back.
It's the same language that's in the comp plan.
Okay.
I don't know if that was original language or if it was amended, but it's the same language.
Yeah, I don't have any issues with it. I just wanted to make sure I didn't need to read through it twice more before we got to planning. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Jackman.
My pages are from the wrong numbered pages as well. These are the copies I guess I got last week, so the numbers on the pages are a little bit different. But I'm going to start with the general commercial, which I think is on all of them on page 3. First, is general commercial listed in the comprehensive plan already as a land use? Okay. In the land development code, the general commercial uses that are listed currently under general commercial, a lot of them have not been added to this general commercial. So, all of these uses that are listed in general commercial as it stands right now that aren't in here, what are you going to do with all those other uses?
I think, Sherry, that the same language that appears in the comprehensive plan will appear here. So if there's any conflict, the comprehensive plan language would go. Tim, you want to address that?
Well, I think she's talking at the end of 2.
Mm-hmm.
There's neighborhood serving commercial, and there's general commercial categories of use.
It's page 48 in my book.
It's a good point.
Or on the internet.
I got caught up in just looking at what was in the comp plan, but we may need to look at these. Here's what she's talking about, these general commercial uses. Either we change them with the next ordinance, or we do something with this ordinance, and I'm not sure which is the best way to go.
And sure, that's a good point, and that's something we'll address. One of the things we are working on for a future ordinance is a table of permitted uses, to where you can go to one table and look at all the permitted uses. I think that'd be the appropriate time to address those. I think you got a very good point, but hopefully in the next round of changes we propose, we can address it there. One of the things that's a little difficult for our ordinance here is that we have uses kind of spattered throughout the ordinance. When you have a table of permitted uses, it's a table and has every use, every land use district, much like you'd have in a zoning code. And you're able to go and find the land use district and then look at the uses that are allowed and see if it's there or not. So,
and I know there's going to be some, you can't get every single use, but there's a lot in here that's not in here. And it leaves it, this thing way too vague.
Right.
It's open to too much interpretation, misinterpretation, and lawsuits.
Right. Typically, when you look at any kind of zoning code or land development code like that, you're going to have a table of permitted uses, and it's going to have a whole section above that about the interpretation of those and which ones are analogous uses and so forth. But we can, you don't want to get too specific, because sometimes you get too specific, you might leave something out, and then if you intended to leave it out, there's a whole other legal argument about that. But we'll definitely take up your comment and address that most likely in the next round of comments as far as the uses go.
Okay, and the same thing is happening in the industrial. You've taken out, I guess, the light industrial, the medium industrial, heavy industrial, and you put it kind of into just one industrial.
Actually, we didn't. Light industrial is still in there.
Okay.
Medium did come out.
What page is light industrial on?
5 of 3 on mine. Let's see.
That's industrial or light industrial? Okay, I thought that they were leaving it out is why it's not in here. So you're not leaving out light industrial, you're just not...
Not changing it.
Right. There's no change to it.
Okay. On the industrial, which I've got, it's P. When you go into some of those, you're listing warehousing and storage. You know, what types of warehousing and storage, you know, maybe that could be defined just a little bit more, because we're having that problem right now in my neighborhood. You know, I don't know how you would go about defining it, but.
Your neighborhood's not light industrial.
No, it's not, it just looks like it. But if, you know, I'm talking about just in here, and then you have listed uses, and one of those being warehousing, storage. Storage is a good one, is, you know, what are you calling storage, I guess is what I would say. I guess that's what I'm asking you is, you know, do you have a better definition of what you're calling storage in here?
And Sherry, we can explore that, and kind of, if we can find a better way to describe what those mean, we will definitely put that on some of our lists as far as trying to address those.
Okay. And then the same thing in general commercial, you have wholesale. That's another one that, you know, that's listed on H. You've just got, you know, some of you go through offices, retail, wholesale, you know, some of those need more definition, I guess.
A little more defined? Okay.
Yes. And that's it. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sherry. All right. Anyone else want to speak to this section on item number 2? Anita, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Anita Page, I just want to second what Leonard said about taking the opportunity to look at zoning now rather than continuing piecemealing the land development code. It sounds like the direction we're going now is the land development code will simply parrot the comp plan, in which case why have 2 documents that say exactly the same thing?
That's my sentiments exactly.
Right. So but what everybody keeps asking for over and over and over is specificity as much as is reasonably possible, so they know exactly what they can do with their property, what can happen to the property next door. And we just keep saying, yeah, we'll do zoning, but in the meantime, let's keep patching the land development code. It seems like all the energy we're putting into Sherry's right. I mean, when you look at the non-NPA definitions of commercial and so forth, yeah, there's a whole new set of definitions over there. So you gotta go through, and you miss something here, you've missed it over there. It just seems to me that all the effort we're putting into this, we need to just go ahead and bite the bullet. I mean, Destin did it after the fact. You know, it's not unheard of. Nobody starts with nothing. You know, even when people put in zoning. You know, they didn't start with no rules and then just all of a sudden say, we're going to zone. So I just want to reemphasize that, just because I think it would solve a lot of issues. I think it would have solved a lot of the issues that were talked about earlier. If you've got special designations for how people are using their property. But anyway, I did want to say on neighborhood commercial, back to page 11, is I do think that because it is specifically in proximity to neighborhoods, that the Board of County Commissioners does need some latitude in areas in which there may be impact to neighborhoods with outdoor music broadcasting, even display of goods and so forth. It prohibits it, but it also does allow the Board of County Commissioners to allow what appears to be prohibited when it's reasonable in the context to do so. And I think because neighborhood commercial is one of those categories that kind of molds itself to the particular neighborhood that it impacts, that what may be appropriate adjacent to one neighborhood area may not be appropriate next to another one. But it allows, right now, there's a certain built-in flexibility. And I think that's somewhat important until we get something like zoning. And then, again, you know, the rules are laid out, and they're laid out with some clarity.
All right. Thank you, Anita. All right, anyone else like to speak to this section of the agenda? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Don Riley. On page 4 of 3, midway down, 7C4 under general commercial, at least 20% of the dwelling units are for very low, and moderate income housing, and this pertains to apartment complexes. This particular bit of sociology, in my view, has no business in the code. It is something that has demonstrated its fallacies nationwide. It is a failing policy. It has failed. It fails today. It will continue to fail. And the record, public record, is replete with example after example of how this is, in fact, destructive of communities and, by extension, destructive of property values, and like a boulder in a pond. And when you're talking about a confined area such as Walton County, and in particular the peculiarities that are attendant, the demographics of South Walton, this doesn't have any business in there. As a resident, a full-time resident here, of course, I'm all in favor of no apartments getting built because it's going to help out the traffic down here. It'll be less than it otherwise would be. Nonetheless, I had this discussion with Mac. This is already in the code. I understand from him that there are discussions as to whether or not this number is too high or whether, in fact, this requirement should be in there at all. I would urge y'all to reconsider. Circumstances have changed. The evidence is in. Folks, this does not work well. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Riley, appreciate it. Anyone else? David?
Excuse me, I forgot a moment of passion. I forgot one little thing I want to do. In commercial, because of a recent thing we had before the Planning Commission, my suggestion would be under number D in commercial, where it says all development within this land use category shall provide for safe and efficient access and shall be required to meet state and county. My suggestion would be that if we deem it democratically feasible, to change that to must. I mean, I think that we're only making it our situation. This is in D under commercial. Let's see, number 7D, special conditions within the district. Page 4 of 3 on mine, but I don't know what it is on the current one.
4 of 3.
Mm-hmm. Where it says all development in that square shall provide and shall. I feel so strongly about it that we need cross access for most commercial, that if it's deems the standards of the state and the county's access management design standards, that the development applicant must meet those standards. That would be my suggestion, just because I feel so passionate about it. Don't know that will fly, but certainly like to see it.
Thank you, David. All right, anyone else like to speak to this section of the meeting today? Anyone else? All right, here no one else. We'll move on to number 3 on our agenda, the discussion about the land uses in the LDC, deletion of those land uses. Yeah.
This is actually a text amendment to the comprehensive plan dealing mostly with mixed use. There's a couple other changes, but the problem we're seeing is most of the mixed use categories require 3 or 2 mixed uses. It's a requirement. You have to do 3 or 2. Well, how do you do that on a half-acre lot or a 3/4 acre lot? There's no provision in here currently on small lots, so we've added a provision just about in every mixed use category that if it's less than 5 acres, the mixed use requirement doesn't apply. So basically it's one. You do one use, whether it's all commercial, all residential. There's no requirement for multiple uses. Now we came to that 5 acres from Coastal Center. It identifies projects of 40 acres or more needs a minimum of 3 uses. Less than 40, more than 5, 2 uses. So nothing was addressed if it's less than 5. So that's where the 5 acres came from. And now it says if it's less than 5, no requirement for mixed uses. And we did do a couple other changes, like in some of the categories, it tells you how to get the maximum density, but that's it. What if you don't want to do that? What's the density? So we've tried to do that with a compatibility analysis, which will require an amendment to the Land Development Code. That's not in the code now, but once this gets approved, we'd have to put it in the code. But we're trying to identify a criteria of what the density is if it's not the max, because it tells you if you do this and this, you can get the max density. But if you don't do that, it doesn't tell you what it is. So with the compatibility analysis, you determine based on the area around it, it's 2, it's 4, it's 8, it's 10, it's whatever. So those are the main changes. Couple other minor changes. Well, I guess this is a major change in VMU. In VMU, if you're on 98, 331, or 30A, there's no requirement for a mixture of uses. But if you're not on those roads, there is. You have a minimum of 3. So we're trying to keep apples to apples, so we're requiring it for both. Whether you're on 98, 331, or 38, or any other road, if it's more than 5 acres, you're required to have 3 different land uses. And we made a change where it was one of those had to be active outdoor recreation. It was a requirement. You had to have active outdoor recreation. So we're changing that to active or passive. You can do either. You still have to do recreation, but it's not required to be outdoor active. So those are the main changes. You may see, I may not have covered every change, but those are the main ones.
All right, thank you, Tim. All right, any comments? Yes, ma'am, Anita. Oh, Mary. Okay.
Oh, I'm just
She beat you up there, Anita.
I'm just a little confused. I'm the junior here, not understanding everything. Go to page 1 of 10 on small neighborhood. Okay, I don't know if your pages are like my pages, but anyway, small neighborhood, 10 to 40 acres, right? 10 to 40 acres. So when we come down to page 2 of 10, which I'm on now flip to 2 of 10 for, okay, it says requires a minimum of 10 and a maximum of 40 contiguous acres. That's under the location and under A. But then when I come down under E, under special considerations, under 2, small neighborhood projects are subject to following of less than 5 acres. Well, how can you have less than 5 acres if you got to have a minimum of 10 acres, unless you have wetlands and you actually are dealing with a parcel bigger than 10 acres, but only it's going to fit what you're going to do on 5. Am I correct?
Those are new. Those are new designations. If you came in today and you wanted to do a land use change to small neighborhood, it has to be a minimum of 10 acres.
And a maximum of 40.
Now,
we have lots of parcels that are smaller than the minimum, and that's what we're trying to address with relaxing the mixed use requirement.
okay, so the 5 acres here addresses property that is currently small neighborhood that is less than 10 acres. That is 2I?
Right.
1? Is that what that's addressing?
Yes.
Existing small neighborhood less than 10 acres.
They're undeveloped too.
And undeveloped, okay. Okay.
That's my exact issue. And I would suggest some language to clear that up.
Okay,
because
so-
right now, it does read like an inconsistency. I did the same thing. I read it and then I went, what? Because it looked like you were creating new categories of 5 acres for small neighborhood, T&D,
Right.
coastal center.
What if
blah, blah, blah.
what if we added some language in the location criteria that says for new designations of small neighborhood, it requires a minimum of 10 acres and a maximum of 40 contiguous acres.
That might.
Well,
I think we have that in some of the other comp plan categories where we have locational requirements.
Yeah, we can clear it up so it's not confusing. Yeah, we can definitely clear that. Tim, you got those notes?
Well, the point you're trying to get across here, whether it's T&D or small neighborhood or whatever, is this 5 acre business where you don't have to have a mixture only applies if you have an existing parcel that's less than the acreage and has small neighborhood, for
Right.
example, as its land use. A new development on that parcel, obviously,
Right.
would not have the mixture of uses.
Correct.
I would would just clarify by saying something to that effect. In everywhere you said this 5-acre business, just clarify what it applies to.
Okay, we can do
Just
that.
simple language
Sure.
can take care of it.
If you're going to speak, please come to the podium and speak into the microphone.
Okay.
Go ahead. I got one other one.
This is being recorded, by the way, so.
Yeah.
The video.
Yeah. All I'm suggesting is if that is the intent, with just a minimum language change, you can clarify that to make it clear that in all of these categories where you've put this provision in, it only applies to the new development of existing parcels less than 5 acres that are already designated for whatever the category is, VMU, small neighborhood, T&D, coastal center, whatever.
Okay.
It was very confusing also when I read it and seemed contradictory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clear that 5 acres doesn't meet the intent of a small neighborhood or a T&D or
Right.
whatever. When you read the whole purpose of the land use, it's clear. So it's clear that that's not what was intended, was to create 5-acre parcels. But the wording was definitely contradictory and confusing.
Okay. Thank you, Nina.
Yeah, one other change I failed to mention is, since you mentioned T&D, if it's under the 5-acre threshold, it would be limited to neighborhood commercial. So that's a change as well. Anything above 5 acres, you could do neighborhood or general. But if it's less than 5, then you only can do neighborhood commercial. So that's a change.
I mean, it's hard to imagine. How did we get so many like T&D parcels that are less than 5 acres? How did that even happen?
A dog painting the map in 1996.
There just can't be that many of them.
There's quite a few in Point Washington. I mean, that's kind of what's precipitated this. Vivian and I were looking. There's a lot that's T&D that's 0.49 acres. You know, how do you put three land uses on 0.49?
And Anita, we asked our GIS department to look at those parcels, and it's an enormous number of parcels that are in this category that are below what the required minimum is.
Yeah.
It's an enormous number. I mean, I don't know how it happened, but they're there. They're out there.
Yeah. And I support what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it needs to be clear.
Thank you.
Okay, now I flipped over to VMU. Do we have a delineation written anywhere? And I didn't take the time to go and look someplace else, I admit it. Do we have a delineation of the north-south roads as to whether they're considered the scenic 30A corridor or not? It is.
Yes,
and are all of them, all the north-south, or which ones are?
83 and 283 are only part of the scenic corridor up to US 98. The portion above US 98 or north of US 98 is not part of the 30A scenic corridor.
What about 393?
393 all the way to the bay, 395 all the way to the bay.
Are 393
Yes.
all the way to the bay?
They are part of the 30A scenic corridor, and that's on the first page of chapter 13.
You want to repeat that again?
Sure.
You draw a map for us, Mike?
I'll just read it. And this is from page 1 of chapter 13. The Route 30A scenic corridor applicability, all properties that are located contiguous to County Road 30A, County Road 393, County Road 395, or are contiguous to those portions of County Road 83 and County Road 283 that are south of US 98 shall, for the purposes of this section, be considered within the Route 30A scenic corridor. So all of 395, all of 393, and the south portion of 83 and 283 south of 98.
Are part of scenic 30A. They fall
Along with all of
scenic 30A.
Of 30A.
Okay.
Are part of the Route 30A scenic
Are
corridor.
part of 30A. Okay.
If I might add to Vivian Channel here, the maps are in chapter 13, they're at the end, and they do show the Walton County scenic corridors, 430A and spur roads, and then also a separate map for the Florida scenic 30A designation. So those are at the end of chapter 13.
Okay, so for the VMU less than 5 acres on scenic 30A and those related corridors, then we don't have to do all the 3. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
We're now exempt from that if this goes through.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Eddie, you have some comments?
I was confused what they were. I think I got some. Eddie Foster. I had the same confusion that they did regarding the T&D in the small neighborhood. I think if we change a couple of words in here, we can kind of get some language to y'all.
Sure.
For new development projects on existing parcels designated either small neighborhood or T&D that are less than 5 acres. I think that'll clear it up, because I had the same confusion. I thought we were trying to create T&Ds less than 5 acres. So,
Okay, thank
that was
you.
it.
Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, James Foley, I'm representing the Point Washington Historical Association. I'm the president of that group. We've been in existence for about 7 years. I want to say this is the best group of planners and thinkers we've ever had to deal with. However, in the past 7 years, Historic Point Washington has pretty much just been walked over by developers. We've dealt with it through height, density, everything else. We've had a neighborhood plan. I think it's the oldest neighborhood plan in Walton County. I'm not sure. We're definitely the oldest community in existence in Walton County. However, I see in here twice the most vexing word that has pretty much ruined us: compatibility. The proposed project ensures compatibility with surrounding neighborhoods, conformity with Section E below. Then in Section E it says the development must submit a compatibility analysis showing compatibility criteria. And so there it is 3 different times, but we have never been able to come up with a definition of compatibility. We had one, and developers fought it down, and my group was scared to death we're going to end up like Panama City or Destin, that they could just walk in and do whatever they wanted to do. A month ago, D.R. Horton, I don't know if I should even mention the names of the people, we had what we thought was a very, very strong tree ordinance. They walked in there and cut down 4 or 6 live oaks, real live oaks, not the water oaks, anything else, Virginis, Quercus virginiatus, several extremely 12-inch and better Magnolia grandiflora, cut them all down because they were in the footprint of these houses that they were squeezing in. Is that compatible? I mean, especially on a scenic corridor, these trees pretty much marched and created a colonnade all the way to the water. They're gone now, chopped up for firewood. So we're very leery of reading about compatibility until somebody can come up with what compatibility means in relation to an old established community. I mean, you can destroy us just like that by cutting all those trees down. And they did. They put a scar right there in the middle of it next to the cemetery. In years past, neighbors would not allow, I mean, my God, if somebody came out there with a chainsaw, you'd just cuss your neighbors and make them feel bad, and they'd change the footprint of their house, tweak it a little bit. But these bigger companies are coming in, boom, 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 boom. This works in Nebraska, it'll work here. They're looking at the bottom line, that's it. They could have, let me say it, they could have made themselves a lot more money by building a gorgeous little community underneath the oak trees there and sold them for a whole lot more money. Anyway, so that's our biggest concern. We met with you earlier, and we finally have just given up trying to figure it out here on the local level. We've hired a group of people out of Notre Dame who are doing a pattern book for Historic Point Washington, and we'll present that to you at a later date. And I'm sure we'll have to go through a long process to see if developers will sign on to the idea of having a pattern book to preserve the community. But until then, if we can at least get a compatibility definition that we can stick in the front of developers when they try to do things like cut down all our old oak trees and stuff.
Sir, if you
Yes.
look on the previous ordinance on page 13, that's what we're proposing to start with.
Outstanding. Okay,
That-
we're
it's
on
good.
13?
That whole page. Number B,
Okay.
the applicant shall submit a compatibility analysis demonstrating that the proposed uses, density, and intensities are compatible with the surrounding area. The compatibility analysis shall meet the following criteria. That's what we're going to start with. That doesn't mean it won't get changed.
Right.
But that's going to take an additional ordinance to amend the land development code, because we want to get this ordinance through first.
Gotcha.
The next ordinance, then we want to try to get in this compatibility, because this ordinance we're talking about now is linking compatibility to the density. So we got to get this approved first, then we want to put this in the land development code.
Okay, fantastic. This is hot off the press. I didn't get a chance to read it before I showed up, but as long as you're working on the definition of compatibility, it'll help a lot. Make sure that that page is stuck in front of anybody that comes in here trying to get building permits with chainsaws.
Well, this is where we're going to start. It's pretty comprehensive, but that doesn't mean there won't be changes before
Sure.
it gets approved.
At least your heart's in the right
And the
place.
compatibility issue has been an issue that I've heard since I've been here. I've been here 2.5 years, and I've heard that quite often. The compatibility standards are a little bit ambiguous, and so we want to try to tighten those up a little bit. If we're going to use compatibility, we need to make sure it's got very good criteria.
At our last, when you met with the historic group 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever it was, I described what we're working on as far as a pattern book, and I'm quite sure you said you're really familiar with how that kind of thing works.
Mm-hmm.
You still feel pretty good about that? Because we're putting a lot of money into that project at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outstanding. I really think that's what's going to work better here, because any good lawyer can walk through this stuff, change a few words, and make it a nightmare for everybody. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anita?
On the compatibility question, like on infill, the compatibility standard there, it really pertains more, to height, setbacks, density, and that sort of thing. It wouldn't help the character in the sense of heritage trees, which, we do have some very special places. And he has pointed out something that is absolutely right. In 3 hours, they can be demolished and gone. And once they're gone, they're gone. You're not going to get, none of us are going to see a 100-year-old live oak tree grow back. We've had a requirement for a tree ordinance in the comp plan for a while now. We've, for whatever reason, never gotten around to it. We're doing all this other stuff, but we're not doing that.
Has there been any proposals on tree ordinances in the past at all? Any proposals?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
What we've incorporated into the Point Washington Neighborhood Plan, which was, the genesis of that was the National Arborist Standards from, I don't want to get the name wrong, the National Arborist Group. That was a model tree ordinance that we started with, and by the time we worked through the process, it got watered down by the time we got to the BCC to what we have today. But in all of Walton County, this is the only place where we have specific tree protection, is in Point Washington, and it's not tremendous. We certainly understand the concerns about the development at Oaks at Eden and or the former Oaks at Eden, as it may always be known to some of us. But we do need to improve that, and we do have a requirement in the comp plan to bring forward a tree protection ordinance. We're trying to focus on those things that people are most interested in right now, although that is extremely important. We just haven't heard enough about that. Because I think we put it in the comp plan and everybody forgot about it, the public forgot about it. And yes, that is something that we need to bring forward. But what we're trying to do is address those things that the county commission thinks are priorities. If we could get some help with those priorities, we would appreciate that.
I think also in the past, we've been very fortunate. We've had a lot of more local developers who in many instances have been more sensitive to the community and done a lot of things that they weren't even required to do in the way of, preservation and setting aside natural space and so forth. But now that, things are beginning to move again, and you start getting these larger organizations, sweeping through, across the country, you lose a lot of that sensitivity to special places that are special to the people, within neighborhoods and so forth. And there needs to be some way of protecting those as much as possible, as much as reasonable, considering people's, property rights and so forth, but as much as reasonable. And that's all I want to say is we're just,
And I think you're right.
I didn't want him to think that a compatibility ordinance would save those trees.
Right.
Because typically it doesn't address things like that when you don't have any kind of tree protection. Unless you've got something special, a neighborhood plan or an overlay district or some sort. That's some extra added protection.
Right. And I think you got live oaks, things like that. That gives a community a sense of place and character that you really can't recreate by even bringing in new trees and replanting trees. That doesn't do that for the existing oaks. Those are very important.
Well, they kind of define who we are and what we are, the natural resources, that make Walton County so special, and such a wonderful place to live, and such a beautiful visual place to live, and the live oaks and a lot of the things, the species that we're lucky to have. But if you look up on FNA, they're becoming imperiled because they're disappearing all around the state. And, we've got still, fortunately, because we're a little bit late bloomers, we have the opportunity now to look at some of the mistakes other areas have made that they're trying to retro now and maybe not make those mistakes.
Right. Thank you, Nina. Yes, ma'am. Sherry.
This is in reference to the compatibility again on page 7 of 10. Did he reference when you were referencing the compatibility ordinance? Is there something going on that you guys are setting up for? Is there a compatibility criteria set right now? Is there something in the book?
Yes.
Okay. Does that address non-conforming uses? So, for instance, if somebody came into my neighborhood and did a compatibility analysis, if they didn't exclude the non-conforming, then, you would be looking at compatibility with industrial.
So what you're saying, Sherry, that a compatibility analysis should not include the non-conforming uses?
Right.
My guess is right now they would include all uses. I'm not sure if we don't have any exclusion written into that that would limit you from looking.
Well, then I'm asking for that to be in there because, it's not just my neighborhood, but if you came into my neighborhood and wanted to put something in there and you looked at the compatibility of what's there, then you'd be allowed to put anything there because what's there shouldn't be there by the code. So that's a big problem in my neighborhood, and surely it may pop up in other ones, but I don't think that a compatibility analysis should be set with non-conforming uses. It's almost defeating the purpose.
Right.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Sherry. David. I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. She's been waiting.
I have two items. I am Marge Crawford. I'm also with the Historic Point Washington group. As far as removing the trees, some of them were 400 years old. And our neighborhood plan calls for if a tree can be removed in the footprint of a building, and I guess they have added within 10 foot around. And some of that subdivision right now that we have been talking about, Oaks at Eden, that means they could take down every single oak tree. But there's also part of our neighborhood plan that says they have to replace the trees with the same kind of tree, but of course a younger tree. And when they get their permit allows them, just blanket, no one inspects it. You can cut down your tree if it's in the path or within 10 feet. Doesn't say a word about replanting. Who's going to oversee that? Or who do we go to say at what time do they replace these trees? So that's one thing we want to be sure of that is carried out. The other thing, and it's probably in here, I just haven't seen it, it talks about parcels of property under 5 acres, which makes sense to me, but what about between 5 and 10? What happens to those? Because it says between 10 and 40.
Tim, you want
Required to have a mixture of uses.
Soon as they hit the, okay. Let's say someone has 4 3/4 acres, they get their permit to do what they want, but meantime they own the parcel next to it. Now they're going to merge the two. What happens then?
At the point of development order, we would consider the extent of their entire site.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Not necessarily any property that they're not proposing to develop with this particular application.
Okay.
Whatever their particular site is how we have to apply the rule.
Okay, thank you.
And David?
David Kramer, for the record, I want to speak specifically page 8 of 10, village mixed-use categories. Number small I, it starts at second sentence, says for new development projects of less than 5 acres, comma, the requirement for mixed uses does not apply. Now, we've discussed that, but I would like to try to help clean this up a little bit and understand just exactly what the requirement for mixed uses are in the language that's below. Number 5, red letter 5, says entertainment and recreational uses, using the, I'm just putting on a pretend lawyer hat here and using the word uses. Anytime I see the word uses and we're saying that mixture and the word uses does not apply, so I'm trying to find out which do and which do not. It says entertainment, recreational uses include sports clubs, etc. That would still apply, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. The next one, residential uses must extend, that one would be out, is that correct?
Well, they would all
If you were
apply
less-
to the mixed use. They would not apply if the mixed use doesn't apply. These are all requirements for the mixture of
I'm
uses.
asking if number VI does not apply if you have a parcel less than 5 acres.
Does not apply.
Okay. Number 7 underneath, active or passive recreational.
Does not apply.
My suggestion would be if that's the case, after it says active or passive recreational, put the word uses in there, then it's much clearer. The next one, V, 3I or 8, commercial, residential, institutional, and other non-residential uses shall not cover more than 50% of the land. That does not apply.
Right.
The next one, number 9, it doesn't have the word uses in it, but I would guess that could still apply if you wanted to try a small acre project with that on there. Not that it means anything, but that would still apply correctly, correct? And then number 10 down there, which says a development compatibility analysis set forth, that still applies. Okay. And the scale and uses at the edge shall be compatible with the abutting neighborhood uses. It uses the word uses twice, so I want to be clear that it would apply. Is that correct? I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Okay. And the VMU shall be interconnected, uses again the word uses with abutting uses and pedestrian, so that is not a mixture of uses word. That would also apply. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Then my only suggestion to number 2 below is in where it says number 7, where it says active or passive recreation. Put the word uses in behind there, and it would make it clear, given the same language that you just gave me on all the other ones. And I think that's pretty much exactly the same. And I can understand which ones are applicable and which ones would be taken out. I appreciate that.
All right, thank you, David. Anyone else like to speak to this item?
Just one comment. Presently for B&U, the threshold is 3 acres. And this proposes to take it to 5 acres. Anyone have a comment on that?
Yeah, in the land development code, it has 3 acres, and again, the 5 acres came from because there was no reference to anything below 5 acres.
Oh, that's where the break was. There was language exempting certain others.
In VMU.
In the mixed-use center section of the land development code, which includes VMU, coastal center mixed use, and town center, and
Does it include all of those?
Does not include T&J.
Mixed-use centers.
That would be coastal center mixed use, village mixed use, and town center. Those three presently have a 3-acre parcel size threshold for single use. Anything above 3 use has to have multiple use.
5's great.
You like 5?
I fought for 10 and 96, and the last one, that we got that 3, so 5's great.
All right, any more comments? Anything else? All right, I think that concludes today's workshop, and like I said, we'll have another one on October 2nd at 1 o'clock in this room, so we'll look forward to seeing everyone there. We'll have these comments available for you as well that we've been taking on the screen. If you want to see those, please call us, and we'll be glad to give them to you. Thank you all.
So October 2nd?
October 2nd. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
When did you say the next one?
October 2nd. Yes, sir. Man, no. It's not like being called communist. People need to learn their political science because this is couldn't be considered to be communist because you don't own anything in communism. Oh, that's right. You own nothing. Socialism. No, that's exactly.